You're listening to African Men Speak. 5 questions, real voices, honest perspectives. In this series, we listen to African men and women at home and in the diaspora sharing how they understand masculinity and how tradition and change are shaping their lives today. What does masculinity mean to you today?
Masculinity in general, I'd use a broad concept in the sense that the way I was raised by my dad, masculinity is when I knew my dad would take charge. I knew my dad by him being present and leading the family and making sure that he provided for us all the things that we required as a family. That is how I base my masculinity. In the sense that if we had issues at home, my dad would be able to take care of them. If maybe there was some repair work that needs to be done in the house, my dad would make sure those things are done. If it came to the homework, being that I'm the older brother and I have younger siblings, my dad would sit down with us. We'd end up doing homework together. So to me, is just being a present man and a man who's making things done and basically being a provider. Probably that's just how I'd summarize it.
Can you share a specific moment or experience that shaped your understanding of masculinity?
I remember growing up, I think I was 12 years old, and my dad called us. He told us that he had resigned his job and he had to make a very hard decision. Being that we were living in Parklands, he told us we'll probably move to a smaller house and there are certain privileges that we won't be able to get because of the circumstances, or rather the choice of him resigning, but he was thinking of long term. So him making that decision and actually being open with us and telling us that our circumstances will change is something that has come to reflect with me as I've grown older. So I might not have noticed that at that young age, but as I've grown older and I've become a dad, I think that really kind of answers that question that you asked.
How do you see the relationship between traditional and contemporary views of masculinity in your community?
From my eyes, I'd like to give an example of one for each. I'd look at traditionally, like when we were being raised up, I realized the masculinity aspect traditionally was more broad-based in the sense that it was not necessarily your dad, your uncle, your grandfather, the men within where you were growing up, irrespective of whether they were from your community in the sense of tribe, but where you used to live, they kind of had a role to play. Like if you'd go out there, you misbehave, they would actually be able to discipline you and your dad would be okay with it. As compared to nowadays, it's a bit different because nowadays you'll see kids misbehaving, kids actually having really bad behavior. But how it is right now, we as parents, there's no way you'd touch another parent's child. And if you do, people are even taking people to court, So I think the conflict where I think we've gone wrong is, and if you realize of late, even in this country, you're seeing kids who are actually below 15 years old are joining gangs, and they're actually even posting videos and actually speaking very vulgar language. So I think because that hasn't really, and also that the fact that also I'm not a big fan of it, but we used to have what you call corporal punishment when us guys were younger. So you tend to fear your teachers, you tend to fear your parents, your uncles would actually be able to, discipline you. So I think there's a big clash on that. And I think that's why there's also a high rise of crime and discipline, mostly with the younger children, because as parents now, we don't discipline our kids the way we were disciplined by our parents. I remember my dad would take a cane and beat me. Nowadays, you'll see some parents just tell the kids, naughty corner, you won't have this meal, or something like that. Yeah, so I think that's how I'd look at it. Yeah.
Based on your understanding of masculinity, what experiences, resources, or support do you think would most enrich the journey of African men today?
I think how I'd look at it is, I'd like us to go to the root cause. I believe, and I'll base it from when somebody is growing up as a child, and mostly the focus on the boy child. I think the boy child has really been neglected. Actually, the African young man has been neglected because if you look at the guys who are probably just become fathers from the age of 35 to 45, and mostly African men, based on how they grew up, they saw their fathers being the providers. And those were good traits because if you're a Christian or if you're a Muslim or whatever religion you're in, you're told as a man you're the leader of the house, so you need to provide. And unfortunately now you realize the world has changed. Now we have women who are in the workspaces, African women who are actually doing better than African men. And so some men are actually feeling, like, okay, I'm not able to be able to provide and bring the bread and butter. So some of them are being discouraged. And when it comes to that support, I just feel the society itself is quite unfair on the African men in the sense that there's just too much pressure for them to provide. And yet you'll see this guy will end up doing like 3 to 5 jobs just to be able to provide for his kids. And I'd also say there's a lot of peer pressure, mostly with the African men in our society, because you look at your neighbor, you'll see he's doing well, but you actually don't know what he's going through. So you end up making bad choices by trying to live a lifestyle that you cannot afford, which now ends up taking you to certain lengths whereby you can't. And that's why there's a high suicidal rate of African men. And you even see whereby they're actually even killing their own families. And that's why there's a lot of domestic violence between spouses. So I still think as African men, we need to be each other's brothers and not support your fellow man. And as African men, we need to be able to speak because we've been raised that a man should not cry. You should not remove any tears. You should just hold in there and be strong. And I think that is now a clash from our tradition, which is affecting us right now because the times have changed. During our fathers' times, things were not as expensive as they are right now. There was not so much exposure. Now the world has turned. There's a lot of bad things happening. And there's not so much support. And that particular time, the population has also increased. So there are not enough jobs out there for everyone. And with all these wars that are happening, and that time there was not as much corruption as there is right now, and mainly in African countries. So I think that is really affecting us. So that is actually a negative that we probably is clashing with the contemporary that we have right now. So yeah, I think that's how I'd lay it out.
What message about masculinity would you want to share with young African men today?
For me, at my age now, I'm looking at a young African man who's just graduated from university and is trying to build his life. I think the best advice I would give them is there's still time for everything. Do not rush. Do not get peer pressure. Have a plan. Save. And yes, I mean save. Even if it's whatever small amount, have that culture of saving. And also learn how to say no. It is very important. If you learn how to say no, by no, I mean that you have friends, they tell you, let's go do certain things. If you can't, you can't. And if you cannot, live by your means. If you can live by your means and if you can be able to save, and with now what you have AI, there's so many opportunities out there. Do not be dependent on one job. Look for multiple jobs, look for multiple investments, and be hungry at this young age. In other words, labor now to enjoy your future. That's what I'd say.